So hopefully everybody can see my screen. Michelle's my assistant for today, but she's going to hop off here in a few minutes. So at any time, feel free to interrupt me, come off of mute. I will try to be monitoring the chat and the Q&A, but sometimes I have a couple screens going and I kind of get on a roll sometimes. So have no problem with you just coming off of mute and interrupting me. That won't throw me off or interrupt anything. So I want, if it's something on a slide that you have a question about, I'd rather have you ask right then. We will have breaks at like maybe an hour. And then at like the 2 hour mark, we were going to go probably the full 3 hours. It's a smaller group, so we may not go the full 3 hours, depending on how many questions, but we will. It'll be a lot of information coming at you. You will get these slides later. And like Michelle said, she'll send out a video later too. So don't feel like you have to write everything down. Don't feel like if you miss something, you can always go back and kind of revisit that section and go back and check the slides with the information on it, or again, watch the video. So we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm Sandy DeWald and I'm the instructor. Michelle is my assistant for a few minutes this morning, and then she's going to hop off. There we go. So we're just going to cover a little bit about SCORE, some background about the organization, and then kind of go into, again, the meat of the conversation or the workshop today. And so SCORE is a volunteer organization. I'm a volunteer, Michelle's a volunteer, anyone that you kind of really talk to at SCORE is a volunteer. There is the national organization, which is across the whole entire country, there's like thousands and thousands of SCORE volunteers, and then there's individual chapters. So the Nashville chapter is the one Michelle and I are part of, and that's, again, for resources around, oh, Connor, that's no problem if you can, you're also in the car. And then if you have to drop off, no problem, you'll get the recording later too. And then we can always, arrange a time to talk later if we need to. So SCORE is, and that's one thing I should bring up. One thing that SCORE is really, the two kind of focus areas for SCORE is mentors or mentorship, which is kind of like a business coach, and then the education piece. So I know Missy has a mentor with Ed. I don't know if does anyone else have a mentor through SCORE Nashville? If you want to raise your hand or yes or no. Or not. So we'll talk a little bit, not yet. Okay, thanks, Connor. So SCORE, the mentoring is like one of the really good things that SCORE provides. And that's all the chapters provide mentors. So the Nashville chapter, it's really like your business coach, and it's a free resource for you as to get your business going. And at any different stage in that business, that mentor can kind of come in and help you be that sounding board, be that kind of like resource connecting you to other things in the area. Again, they're not going to give you the answers. You still need to make your own decisions of the business, but they're great generals. They know a lot about different information, or a lot about different parts of a business. And then we also have subject matter experts. That's what I am. So I would not be a mentor. That would be your coach that meets with you regularly, but I would be brought in for a deeper dive on a very specific subject matter. And we have different people that can handle marketing. There's other ones that do finance. There's ones that, they can, branding, all different things they can kind of bring in as kind of doing one-on-ones or deeper dives with your regular mentor. And again, that mentor is there for the life of your business. You can use them as little or as much as you want. It's easy to sign up for a mentor. You just make sure that you go to the Nashville SCORE. In the bottom left-hand corner, there's the actual website for the Nashville chapter. So you can make sure to get somebody assigned here locally that you can meet with. And then they match you up with a mentor, and then you guys decide like how often you want to meet. You can meet in person, you can meet virtually, you kind of set, and then they're there for what you need. You can use them. Maybe you have a lot of questions right away, and then you don't use them for a couple months, then you come back and then you don't need them. But they're there for the life of your business. So they're a great resource, and I highly recommend having that, since it's a free resource as well. The other thing that SCORE does is education. So the workshop that you're in today, we have regular workshops that happen every month. We have workshops that happen every quarter. We have workshops that happen a couple times a year. So it just depends on when they're offered, kind of how frequently we offer them. But there are a lot that the Nashville chapter does. And then the SCORE national organization, if you go to the national website, they have on-demand webinars and different things that you can, if you're not offered something here local in a chapter, you can take a webinar for free on the national one. The other thing we do is like some kind of special events. So we just did a women's pitch competition a couple of months ago. We've done like maybe kind of one-off kind of workshops. So those, once you're on the email list now, you'll get notified of future workshops, or you can go out to the website. Michelle is great about kind of putting the workshops out there on the website every quarter, kind of the next couple of months, 2 to 3 months, she'll have them listed. And then so you'll know what's kind of coming up. There's workshops sometimes during the week and sometimes on the weekend. So it just depends on when it's offered. And then Cindy, if you don't have one yet, no problem, but a mentor. But if you want to think about that and kind of get signed up for one, it's a great resource for you to have kind of a business coach for your business. So who am I? I told you that I am not a mentor, but I am a volunteer that's a subject matter expert. So obviously you're in the product development workshop. That's one of my areas of expertise is product development. I've spent 20 years developing new products and bringing them to market. I think I lose count of like over 400 products that I've brought to market and launched. So that includes the entire life cycle. We're going to cover this in this workshop today. That's why it's more than just one part of developing the product. It's the entire product life cycle that you see here on the screen. And that goes from market research, developing a concept, prototyping, the actual development, or production, launching it, and then marketing it. Because you're going to have to do all of those aspects. You can't just think of, I focus on one and then I kind of forget about the others. You're going to be responsible for everything in developing and launching that product. So when I say product development, it's actually product development and product marketing, those two sides. And this is a continuous cycle. You're going to kind of go through it. Maybe you'll back up, you'll do it again. You'll kind of repeat some sections and kind of just depends on how the product goes. But it's definitely something that you're going to have to, it's kind of a never ending cycle. And it's actually a lot of fun developing new products. Going something from a concept or an idea in your head to a physical product is really exciting, but there's a lot of work in between and a lot of steps. Oh, I'm being a little pop-up. Let me get rid of that. Okay. So we're going to jump right into it. So we will go probably about an hour and then we'll take a little 5-minute break and then do another hour and a little break and then finish up. So the first thing I want to talk about in this product life cycle is the market research. So I know a lot of times we have a product in our heads and we have something that usually it's coming from a need that we see or something that we wish we had in our professions or something that we wish we had in a hobby or something like that we see a need for in the market. But we still need to actually do market research outside of what we feel people would want. We have to kind of validate that concept. So the first thing is that when we do market research, we're not really talking about the product. We're talking about customer needs and the customer problem. So everything we do has to be customer focused. That means we always need to think who is going to be using this product and what do they need it to do? Because sometimes we think one way, doesn't mean that that's going to be what your target customer also believes. So you have to kind of figure out what are they doing now to solve the problem? And I will say that they're always doing something. There's always some way they're trying to solve their problem. It may not be the best way. It may be something that doesn't work very well. And that's why your product can come in and be better. But they are doing something now, or they've tried different things. What have they tried that worked, hasn't worked? And then you also need to understand how much of a pain this is for your customer, because unless it's a significant pain, if it's just kind of like, it's kind of annoying, not that big a deal, then, or it's like, oh my gosh, I need to figure out, I wish I would buy a product right now that solves this because it's such a pain for me. So that's going to tell you what kind of how in demand that product will be. Because if it's kind of an annoying, like, hey, I can live with it, it's fine, or if I found something fine, that's one aspect of that is going to be they're price point sensitive. They're going to not want to pay for it because they don't see that much of a pain. The more pain it is, the more they'll value the product, and the more they'll actually like think the cost of the product is worth it because it solves that problem. If it doesn't really solve that problem, then it's really not, it's going to be not, I may buy it, it may not. And you're not really going to, you don't really have that hook that the customer really need that you're solving. You're not quite there to the actual problem that you're trying to solve for the customer. All right, there you go. So how do you do market research? I will say that I just saw that I think Cal is doing a market research 101. So he's another workshop that we offer is coming up here fairly soon. But he goes much deeper into market research. So we're going to cover all the different areas of the cycle, but then we'll have he's going to have a much deeper dive on market research if you need more help in that area. But you need to talk to existing or potential customers. And I know it's kind of scary sometimes talking to people, but you've got to get out there and talk to actual customers. And I would love to say that I'm sure you've talked to friends and family. I'm sure you've shown to people, and that's nice. But the problem with that is that, first of all, friends and families aren't going to want to hurt your feelings. They're not going to tell you the truth. They're going to say, yes, of course, that's a great idea. The second thing is that your friends and families may not be your target customer. If they're not the ones actually would be buying this, no offense to their feedback, it's not as valuable as an actual potential customer. And you can find target, again, that market research workshop goes deeper into this, but there's many ways to find kind of potential customers. Now, you may be in business today and have existing customers. That's fantastic. And you're launching a different product to them or a new product to them. Go talk to your existing customers, find out what pain point you're trying to solve, and do they think this is going to solve that. Otherwise, we need to talk to potential customers. If it's new and you're not in that market or you're not really sure, then you need to find out, well, who do I think would be the one that would use this type of product, and where are they? So that could be, sometimes it's like listening. And one thing we forget about sometimes, as much as we don't like social media at times, things like Facebook groups that are targeted, those are targeted users. So if you were targeting, parents of a certain age kid and the product was like educational product, then find Facebook groups. Now, you're not going in there to sell, but you're going in there just to listen to the conversations, listen to what they're struggling with, listen to what they're, what things that they are having difficulty with, and does your product kind of fit in any of those pain points they talk about. The other thing too is there's podcasts, there's articles, there's blogs, there's workshops, whatever your target customer, there's an association for it. So if you're selling to plumbers, I'm making up stuff, but if you're selling or physical therapists, then there's an association for that. Then figuring out, listening, getting involved in that group, hearing what they're talking about. And there'll be all kind of insider information inside that trade association and trade journals that talk about different problems in the industry. Conferences are great. Again, it needs to be a conference that your target customer is going to. It can't be a conference that, I'm trying to think, if you're developing, I'm just gonna say physical therapy product, like you may go to a conference that for people with back pain. That's good if your product solves that, is aimed at that market. So that would be a better conference to go to than a conference on marketing or to marketers, because they're not your target customer. So you want to go to whatever kind of conferences or gatherings or groups that are your target customer. And I would also say, once you kind of find these target customers, and you can ask your network. Don't forget about the people you already know. Reach out to them. If they're not even the right one, say, hey, I'm thinking about a new product. I've got an idea. I'd like to talk to somebody that is X. Do you know anybody that fits that description? And have them make a warm introduction for you. And then when you reach out to that person, you need to only say, hey, I'm just developing a new product. I just need like 10 minutes of your time. I just want to ask you some questions. You're not to pitch. You're not pitching your idea. You're not selling your idea. You're literally going in there with a very small ask, just a 10 minutes, so they understand that it's not going to be, oh my God, you're going to be on the phone with me an hour. Now, if they want to keep talking to you past 10 minutes, great. But you're going to say, I just have a couple questions, some key things that you want to learn about that target customer and their pain points, and then what solutions that they have tried already, what did and didn't work with those current solutions, and then kind of what would make it better, what would make the solution they're using today, whatever it is, a better fit if there's a gap or something missing with what they're doing today. And then but you're not selling them. If they ask you, that's great, but the idea is that you're just trying to get information from them. The key thing is to understanding what the customer values. So you have to understand what, and a lot of times I'll do this too in product development. You have an idea in your mind, like this is what the problem is. But when you go out there and talk to actual people, it's going to change and shift. It might be close, but it might need to be tweaked and pivot and twist and just shift a little bit. Sometimes they'll do something completely different. And you're like, oh, whoa, I hadn't even thought about that, what you're doing today. So getting out there and talking to real people is an eye opener. And I would always get my engineers, every time we could get them out with me to do market research and like talk to actual customers, it was amazing because they're always going like, it always surprised them what real people do in the real world, because it's not exactly what we think they're going to do. They're not rational. I'll just tell you that. Sometimes really not rational. But again, we need to understand that always, it's called voice of the customer. You, as the product development, product marketing, product, anything that you're doing in a new product, everything needs to be thought through. How am I solving a problem for the customer? It's always voice of the customer. It's always framed in, what do they need? Not what I want to do, not what's easy for me, not what the engineer wants to do. It's what does the customer need? What pain or gain? And we talk about that. I've talked a lot about pain, but you can also provide a gain. So it could be a product that gives them a benefit that they don't have today. So maybe it is an educational tool and it provides increase in learning. So that'd be like a gain that they're getting. So it can help level up a child's education maybe. So that would be more of a gain versus a pain is like somebody that's having a reading problem. Maybe they're dyslexic and it's a product that's helping them learn, but it's an issue for them. It's a I won't say pain point, but in a sense that, they're having difficulty in an area and you can help solve that problem, or you can take what an educational product could take a child or a learning platform and level up and give them a bonus on top of what they're a gain. So kind of think about in terms of pain or gain. If you can get something that solves both, which is ideal, so you can solve pain and give them a bonus and extra, that's great. But you need to be thinking about, you have to bring them a solution. You can't just say, well, here's a new product and I think it's cool and I'm sure everybody will want it. And if it doesn't really solve a problem, or if they don't see that it's better than the solution they have today, or that it gives them some kind of benefit, then they really won't buy. They just won't. We're all consumers at heart. So think about, again, you can always use your consumer lens when you go to buy something. I mean, do you buy something because you need it to solve a problem, or you think, hey, this is going to bring a benefit to my life? You don't just go buy it because I feel like buying something today, or like, oh, it's as good as what I have today. No, you're going to only buy it if it's better, solving a problem better, or it's giving you a benefit that you can't find today. When you go out and do market research, a couple just quick tips is market research is not pitching. It's not selling. So you don't go, will you buy my product? Will you buy my service? Whatever it is, you're not asking for that. You're saying, hey, you're trying to figure out what the solution is. What are they doing today? How do they use the current product that they have? How would this be different? And if they ask you, you can always explain about your product idea, but again, you're not pitching them. The other thing is that you need to start looking at figuring out price points and what people will pay, because that value proposition and we'll talk about this later, of that product determines how much they think it's worth and what they think they'll pay for it. So I always say when you're doing market research, saying, well, if you're asking about current solutions, like, well, what did that cost you? What did you pay for that? And even if it's round dollars of like, that was $50 or that was $500, at least you start getting some kind of idea of a price. of where they are in the market, because you can't go out there if the current solution today is $50 and your product is better, does offer benefit to the consumer. You can't just go out and say, well, mine should be $1,000, because that's just too big of a gap. If the consumer doesn't see the value from, I can solve my problem, okay, for $50, I'm not going to jump to $1,000. Like, that's too much. So you know that your cost structure is way out of line if you're that much of a gap between what the price points are of the solution in the market. So you always want to follow up with, if you talk to them about the product, that the solutions today, like, well, what do you pay for today? What does that cost you today? Even if it's general numbers, it starts dialing in the price range where you need to be. Or if they do ask you about your product and they want more details, like, well, what's your product look like, or what does it do, and that kind of stuff, and you have a conversation about that, then you also need to follow up with well, what do you think this would cost? What would you be willing to pay for this? So you're dialing in like where that market price is, and the earlier you know that, the better you'll be able to manage your cost structure and your pricing as you go down the road. And we'll talk about how that builds into your product development. But, and don't, because everyone's going to say, of course I'd buy your product, but you have to kind of follow that up with, okay, so what do you think this would be? What do you think, or what's the range that you think this would cost? Or, what do you pay for today in what your current solution is? So getting that pricing structure in. And this is a continuous process. You should be doing market research constantly. It's not a one and done. It's every time you see a potential customer, meet a potential customer, actively talk to current customers, going out to meet new people throughout this entire product development life cycle. You need to be talking to potential customers all the way along. It's not just one here at the beginning and then you never do it again till you launch. It's a continual market research, because when you have a concept, you're going to go back out and talk to customers. When you prototype, you need to go back out and talk to potential customers, all the way along this whole development life cycle. And then knowing who the customers are when you launch, and marketing will help you market better to that target customer. But then you're going to have to talk to them again, and you're going to have constant iterations. So it is super fun. I love market research. I love talking to people, because you're the best ambassador for your product. You have a passion and excitement, and you see that this can help people. You just need to make sure it's the right product that launches, because again, knowing, even if you think it's one way and it needs to tweak a little bit, it's better to know that now than down the road when you're in development. So, and this is your target people. These are the people you want to help. So you should really be, this is super fun. It's not scary at all. I know it's kind of scary, but you actually will, talking to these people and getting feedback on, it's really going to help you develop the best product possible that's going to help and solve their problem for your actual target customers. So then the next section, we have to look at competitors. So again, this is all still part of that market research. You have to know what the competition is out there. And this is always a red flag for me when when I talk to them and they go, well, I have competition. My product is so unique. There's nobody else out there. No, you always have competition. There's always going to be, the competition could be doing nothing. The customers could just be status quo. And that's competition, because then the option is like not buying your product. They're like, I'm satisfied with what it is today. That's still a competition, even though it's not a traditional company. So you need to go out there and research those products or services. And I'm talking more about product development, but this could also be when you're developing a new service for your business. If you're adding on a service, a lot of times we'll have a product and we'll add on a service to it, component. So again, to me, a service is still a product. You're still kind of packaging it. You still need to have all the same, even though it's not a physical thing, you're still launching a product, even though it's a service type product. So when I say products and services, you can go both ways. But you need to research what's out there in the market. And I'll do what's like a product competitive matrix, and I'll start just researching. And it can be as simple in the beginning as Google, go out there and do searches online. It's fine. You could go, if you know certain stores that carry the product that would be competing with yours, go in there and look and physically look at the products and kind of test them. If you can buy competitors' products, to use them, test them, turn them down, like look at them. What do they do? What do you like, don't like about them? That's always, what are some of the features and things that they talk about? in that product? How do they market that product? What's the cost, the price point of that product? So you need to start building out kind of a call it, literally it can be a spreadsheet. You can write it on a piece of paper. It doesn't matter. But just like a column of like, here's the products, here's the brands or products in the market. Here's kind of the attributes. Here's the price point. Here's this, and kind of have a set group of like attributes that you're going to kind of gather about each of those products. You also need to look at competitor pricing because that's going to be huge to know what, and you have to look at net pricing. I do a pricing workshop and we go way deep into pricing. So just know that sometimes there'll be a list price for something and then there's a net price. So the list price is like, you'll see it called MSRP, which is manufacturer suggested retail price. It could be called list price. You'll see it on like the one I was say you can see it most obvious is like on Amazon. You'll see like a list price, or I think they just call it list price. And then you'll see a slash through it and say, here's the price you pay, which means, so they're really not paying that list price. So you need to know what that net price is. What's the actual price the customer is paying? That's going to, because that's going to be telling you what the real price is, not this list. The other example you'll see like on new cars, there's the MSRP, which is like an inflated number up here. And then there's like, oh, but the dealer's giving you these discounts. So then you pay X, then you have like a net price down here. Again, you can still negotiate beyond the net price, but there's in my pricing workshop, I talk about why they do that. There's a whole psychology behind why that happens, but just know you need to figure out what the actual price is, what the net price is, what the everyday price is, whatever it is that the customer is actually paying, not the list. And here's some examples of in that product comparison. So here's that you can do a matrix, you can do product comparisons. Again, these are pretty ones, but literally it can be a spreadsheet. It doesn't really matter, but you're looking at what's the price of each, what are the features, benefits. You can kind of start listing like what are the key things that they talk about in this product, because that's going to help you, because consumers are going to compare. I think there's a stat last time I heard was like 80% of consumers go online, they do research before they ever even talk to anybody about buying a product. Like they're going to do a lot of research, and the more like the more competition is online. If it's only available in a store, that's one thing, but they'll go in and they'll shop and they'll compare between stores that are carrying the product. They will. And the more expensive the product is, the more research they're going to do. If it's a $5 product, they're not probably too much research. They're going to buy it if it's going to solve their problem. But the more expensive it is, or the more complicated or more kind of higher, complexity to the product, or the pain that you're solving, then, and definitely the costly, more price point, then they're going to do more research about it because they don't want to make a mistake. They want to make sure that they're informed, because if you're going to spend, and whether it's $100 to somebody is a lot of money, $500, $1,000, whatever that price range is that your product sits in, people are going to want to do, some research on that before, because no one wants to feel like they've wasted their money. We've all bought something and then we're like, wow, that just really didn't live up to what I expected. And now I'm kind of, well, I got screwed on that one. So they always going to try to do as much research as possible. So doing this product matrix helps you look at and we're talking about features and benefits. So a feature is like, it's this kind of battery pack, or, the battery lasts this long, great. But the problem is that you need to every feature that you have on a product, you need to have the benefit. Why does the consumer care about it? And this is something I love engineers, but they want to just list feature. And you're like, that's great, but why do I care? Again, that voice of the customer, everything you do has to be thought of like, well, why do I care if I'm the customer? So the battery lasts 3 hours. Why do I care if the battery lasts 3 hours? Oh, you can do more work. It's, less charging time. It's whatever that benefit is, you need to always have a feature, and you need to always have what that benefit is. Why does the consumer care? Because you may think it's obvious. It's not going to be obvious to the consumer. Some might be longer battery life. Okay, that seems kind of obvious, but there are going to be other features that you have that may not be quite, or the consumer needs, it never hurts to tell the consumer again, because when they do product comparisons, they're going to see battery life to battery life, and then they're not going to understand, oh, this is a 2.5 megahertz battery and this is a 3.7, but then what does that really get me? Is that difference big enough? Is that I don't know. Oh, it's 3 hours of battery life versus 5 hours of battery life. Okay, I get that. That's why that's important to me. So you have to not go beyond just the features and what the benefits, and knowing how your competitors are talking about their features and benefits will help you dial in. Because if I'm comparing as a consumer, I need to know that even if everybody has the same feature, like there's some things that are just going to be kind of universal across all products need to have a battery. Okay. You still need to list that, because if I'm a consumer and I go, wait a minute, you don't even talk about your battery, but they talk about theirs, I'm going to assume yours is inferior just because you don't even mention that you at least have the minimum same as everybody else in the market. So make sure you have that set up. And then do you offer additional value? Are there points of differentiation? Because you have to show customers why they should buy your product versus the competition. If they can't see a difference between the two, and the one is the established person in the market, and you're kind of an unknown, you're kind of a startup, you're new to the market, they're going to default to the established one that they know in the market. If you can't give them any reason to switch or to pick yours versus the other. So that's going to be critical, is how yours is different. Again, and that's meaningful differences because of the market research you did. You know, what are the pain points and what does your product solve that doesn't? That's why you have to do the market research. What's the current solutions not solving or not doing very well? That's what you got to really kind of lean into that in your product marketing, is to know, why am I different than the competition? So you need to know the competition so you know why you're different. And then that helps you. And is that a meaningful difference for the customer? And then that's going to be that all this is going to build into your product marketing later. So you have to get this information up front. So again, it all builds in this whole cycle down the road. And you have to know, because if somebody asks you, well, why should I buy your product versus product X? You can't just say, don't ever say you're cheaper. Like that shouldn't be your lead story, but you need to have some kind of like, well, mine does these things. After I've talked to customers, this is a real pain point of theirs, and it solves these problems, this problem by X. So you need to be able to always say, what's that point of differentiation? Because that's going to be that value proposition. Again, building, all this builds into everything in this whole product life cycle. And then you need to talk to consumers, because even though you'll do the product comparisons and you'll have this matrix and you'll have this kind of chart built out or spreadsheet built out, you need to actually talk to consumers, because they're going to tell you things that like you hadn't thought about, or maybe some things that you can't tell from a spreadsheet or you can't tell from a website. Like maybe their customer service is like on point, like they answer within 5 minutes every time I have a question. Like you may not see that in a website they may say excellent customer service, but you don't really know that everyone says they have excellent customer service. But if you talk to consumers, they may say, oh yeah, this product really, I had every question I had, they answered, or they were so easy to work with, or if I had a problem with anything, they fixed it right away. Whatever it is, that kind of those intangibles and things that you may not have thought of might be real benefits to the consumer that, goes beyond just kind of that feature list. So again, I told you market research is throughout the whole thing. So you're bringing it back in when you talk to customers, kind of talking about current solutions. And again, that's where you're asking them, well, why do you like it, the solution you have today? Is it working for you? What works and what doesn't work? So they'll tell you where those kind of gaps are of what things they like about it and why, and then what things they are frustrated with or what it's not solving for them. The other thing you would do is a SWOT analysis. I don't know if anyone has done a SWOT analysis. It's kind of a common business sort of thing you may have heard of. So SWOT is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You can do a SWOT for a company, like you can do your whole company SWOT. You can do it for a market. You can do it for a product. You can do it for a department in a company. So you can do SWOTs at all kind of different levels because you're still analyzing the same things. For this though, you need to do a SWOT for your product. And again, all that research you've done, competitive review should build into this SWOT. So it kind of gives you just like a quick overview of kind of the key things in these kind of 4 buckets. So strengths are internal. What do you do well, or what does the product do well? What are the things that, we're like, man, we really got it going on this one. We understand this. We have like, these are some things that are really, really good about the product. And they're really, really good about how we deliver it, or whatever it is. Could be anything around product itself, or delivery, or, how you go to market with it. Weaknesses are also internal. So it's 2 internal and 2 external. So your weaknesses are things that, hey, this doesn't do well, because you're not going to be perfect in every single aspect of your product. There'll be things that maybe a competitor does better. So you need to understand, well, my product doesn't do this as well as the competitor in this one area. It may not be bad. It just may, hey, it's something, because you're going to have to address that weakness. So if somebody asks you, well, why isn't your battery last as long as the competitor? You have to have a explanation or story or reasoning for why that is. Because you're going to get dinged on it. Somebody out there, some customer will ask you about that, and you need to have a response prepared. So you need to understand your internal, that the weaknesses of the product, again, that's internal. And then the next 2 are external. So your opportunities and your threats. So opportunities are things, can you take advantage of different trends? Are there potential partners in the market? Can you do affiliate? Can you use other networks? I mean, are there opportunities out there that you can get your product, can you align your product with, or are there certain, like, maybe like opportunities, like geographic, maybe I'm going to start in Nashville because it's local. I'm here, I can get a strong base before expanding. Like, so those things, like opportunities are kind of more market and external, things that you can take advantage of or leverage in your product development or product marketing, or when you launch. The other things are threats, again, external. So it's, again, out in the market. What are the things you see that could be threats to the product itself, for the product being successful? So that could be, I mean, right now, until the election happens, that's always kind of like, what's going to happen with the election? That's an external threat. You can't really control it or do anything about it, but you need to be aware that, and play out the different scenarios. If this person wins, what do you think might happen? Or if this person wins, what do you think might happen? Some companies are very much tied to the political landscape. The economy is always one that you talk about, and you have to be aware of what's being talked. I mean, right now, the economy is great, jobs are low, inflation is down, all that stuff. So you're like, okay, it's pretty robust, but then you always hear the threat of a recession at some point. So you have to think about again, you may not be able to do anything about them, but just kind of know these things are out there on the horizon, or maybe there's some market forces in your specific market, or there's some issues with your customers that maybe, like I just heard about Ford shutting down a plant for 6 weeks because sales were so low that they're new, so it's like, whoa, if I lived in that market and I was selling products and that was some of my target customers, that would be a huge threat that I need to address. If that's going to hit an economy, that's a big hit. So I need to understand, if I sell products to that market and they're experiencing that kind of an impact, what does that do to me? So understanding whether I can control that or not is not as important as the fact that I know about it. And then I need to take, like, plan A, B, and C. What are some options if that happens? What can I do to help? Because you don't want it to crater your own business because you didn't realize what was out there in the market and what was happening. So again, so kind of think through, start building out that SWOT analysis for your product. Again, this is a living document. You're not going to do it one and done. It's going to kind of constantly, should kind of be revisiting this, especially as you go through the product development process. You're going to go through and go, oh, here's another weakness I didn't think about, or oh, here's a strength I found, or here's something in the market. It's an opportunity. So you can kind of keep, again, it can be a spreadsheet, doesn't have to be fancy, but you're going to kind of start tracking that, and then things might go off and new things will pop on. So we're going to move, that's kind of all the market research. Again, it's a lot of information. And like I said, you will have these slides later, you will have the video recording to go back and read this. So again, don't think you have to know everything all now. It's just a lot of information coming at you, but then you can kind of go back and dig into specific areas. So now we're going to move on to concepts. So you have the market research, you have an idea in your head, but then how do you develop that something more concrete than just an idea in your head? How do you, and you're going to build this concept from that market research. Again, this is a huge mistake I see people do a lot, is that they speed right to concept and prototyping, and they kind of think, oh, I know all the market. I don't need to do market research. I know this. I'm in this, I use this, I would be the target customer. It's a need I see. So obviously I know everything there is to know about this. Nope, don't skip. Even if you think you know everything about the product, you need to talk to because you're only one customer. You're not all the customers out there that are targets. So you need to go out and talk to, and I promise you, the more time you spend doing market research, even if you feel like it's taking too long or I'm taking too much time here, the more time you spend upfront market research will save you so many headaches down the road. You're going to find things, it's going to save you time and money. It doesn't feel like it, but it will save you time down the road. I promise you. And one of that is developing the concept, because again, the more information you have up front, the more valid your concept is going to be. And that's because you're going to start bringing in, you're going to have very specific specs that you need this product to deliver. You're going to have both engineering specs and marketing specs. So that's that features and the benefits. So you're going to have to always think, well, here's like an engineering spec, or here's like some technical spec. What's that marketing, or what's the benefit of that to the consumers? Because that's your marketing message. So again, you can't just have a feature or a technical engineering spec without it also having a benefit, a marketing customer benefit. Those always have to go together, because if it's just a spec to have a spec and it doesn't help or the consumer can't figure out why it helps me, then they're not going to pay for it. They just won't. It just isn't going to happen. So the other thing is that engineering specs, and this is your functionality. This is like, it's this type of material, or it has to last this long, or it's this kind of durability. That's where you kind of start building out, like, can I make this out of plastic, or does it need to be metal? What's the kind of wear and tear on it? What's the lifespan? So you start thinking about like what the product needs to do as far as functionality and like performance characteristics. That's your kind of engineering specs. And then your marketing ones, I just said, those are the ones that benefit the consumer. So you need every time, whether you are doing the engineering yourself, whether you contract that out to somebody, every time there's like an engineering spec, you need to always ask, so what? Like, how does this help the consumer? How does this help me? If I was buying this, why do I care? Because I would love to think that every customer out there buys a product just because they love us and they just want to buy from us and support us. No. If you think about you and as a consumer, consumers always think, what's in it for me? It's like WIIFM or something like, what's in it for me? So you always have that mindset before you spend money. You're going to think, how's this going to benefit me? You do it every single time on something simple or something complex. It doesn't matter. We always, even if it's a quick, like, oh yeah, I can see me using that. Good enough. Like, how is it going to help me? So you always need to ask and I love engineers. Again, I will say this 1,000 times. I love engineers, but they can tend to over-engineer things. And because they think it's really cool thing to put in there, and you'll go on, that's where everything that you put in that concept, you have to validate that consumer will pay for it and the consumer wants it. Because if you can't, everything you add into a product, and sometimes especially with new products, you have all these ideas and you want to put everything in there because you're so excited. You're like, I want it to do this and this and this and this and this. And that's great. But everything you add into a product comes with a cost. And if those aren't valued, or they become way out of spec with what's in the market today, or it solves things, it adds things in there for the consumer, and they don't care. The consumer's like, well, that's nice, but I'll never use that. And so you've added costs in, that the consumer doesn't value, and that means they won't pay for it. So you just added a lot of costs in, you can't, and that's going to make your price higher. But if the consumer doesn't see the value in those things that you added, they're not going to pay for it, and that's going to be a problem. So I would always like, you can always reiterate, you can always do like a product 2.0 and a 3.0. I mean, again, we'll talk about this as a life cycle, which means just because you develop the product once, you're going to turn around and start working on improvements to that product and turn around and spin it again. You're going to keep constantly reiterating this product. So save some things maybe for a 2.0 or a 3.0 kind of product improvements. You don't have to put everything in the first product. You need to put in there what solves the customer's pain, and then you can build on that and that's why you see a lot of products that have like new and improved, and it's like the next one in the kind of a logical, because you're going to have a product portfolio. You'll have one product and then you'll start building on that product probably. And then so that helps you kind of build out. You can always do like a premium product, like you can do like a basic one and then maybe do a premium, and you have two in the line, depending on different target customers are going to value that, but not everybody's going to value all the features in that product. So again, understanding what customers value, and that's what talks about here is, making sure that everything helps the customer. And this is going to be what's called your value proposition. It also, you'll hear the terms unique selling proposition and value proposition kind of interchangeable. There is a difference, but it's probably not meaningful. But it's going to be, your value proposition is, will the customer value the product and pay for it? So that's like, why do they care? And what's that value to the consumer? Your unique selling proposition is essentially how you go to market. Like, what's your point of differentiation? Why are you unique in your selling, what your product delivers versus the competition? So they kind of cross and they're similar, they're technically different, but really you just have to understand what makes your product unique, different than the competition, and why does the consumer care? Why will they value what you are offering to them? So again, and please don't talk in generic terms. So don't say, we have a quality product, we have excellent customer service, because everybody's going to say they have a quality product. Everybody's going to say they have excellent customer service. Those things are kind of meaningless to the consumers. Like, okay, yeah, sure, I'm sure your product is quality, because it has to pass testing, and like, you can't just put something out there from like that's unsafe. So we understand they all have quality products, but can you take that quality statement and make it more tangible for the consumer? That's where it may last X number of hours, or you've shown some. If you ever see the it's a blender, I can't think of the name. But it's like, will it blend? If you can go to YouTube videos and like, will it blend? And it's a blender, and it's like, they'll put like rocks in there, and they put they put a smartphone in there and blended it up. Like, they showed that their blender was so, like, instead of saying it's a quality product or it's the most powerful motor, they actually showed it chopping up blend things that were like, you should never put that in a blender. So again, they went like viral, was a big thing. But just like, will it blend videos? Again, that's showing an intangible quality and like power of that product in something that like, oh my God, they just like blended up rocks or whatever it was they put in there. They've done a lot of things with that blender. So again, that takes it from a generic statement to something more tangible. The consumer's like, wow, if it can do that, it can certainly blend up my smoothie in the morning. If powerful blender is what the consumer value, that power is what they wanted. Don't get trapped in engineering speak. Engineers, again, love them, but they tend to, because at some point you're going to need, if you go to product development, you need to have an engineering involved. You need to have like drawings and specs and materials and all that stuff. So engineers love to tell you things in engineering speak. I used to joke that my job was primarily to translate engineering speak into like normal language. Or that I speak engineering. That was always my joke. They will talk about technical benefits. They'll say it's some amps and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, don't care. No one cares. Like, there's the one technical person. So you list it because there's that one customer out there that really wants to know the technical specs. But again, it can't just be especially if you're an engineer developing the product, it can't just be engineering speak, like how you would talk to an engineer. You know, it's the millimeter of this and the density of this and this. No, don't just, what does that mean in terms of durability? Or what does that mean in terms of structural safety or whatever that it means something. So you need to speak in everyday people language and not in engineering terms. And then use that, that's again, that language from the market research. When customers are telling you their pains and what their problems are and what they want a solution to do for them, you need to track that language, write it down, notes, I don't know, do whatever you need to, record it to get their permission. But all those terms and words and language and phrases that they use in that market research, you will then pull that into your product marketing. You'll pull that into your benefit statements. And then if you've ever had a product, when you went and you looked at it and you read through, you're like, oh my God, that's exactly talking to me. This is so, everything is so my problem. Like this speaks to me, like just reading about the product. That's somebody that's done really good market research because they've taken those key phrases, words, pains, problems, and pull that into their marketing. So they're speaking your language. It's like they know me and they talk to me and they understand my problem. So again, all this at the beginning feeds throughout the whole entire product cycle. The other thing, we're going to go on to prototype. I think we take a break after prototyping. Yeah, we're getting close. Let's run through this and then we can take a break. So prototyping, the other thing so that's just developing the concept. That's like something on paper, laying out the specs, figuring out like what this product is going to be, looking at the competition, kind of figuring out where it's all going to be. Then you actually need to make a prototype. So you need, even if it's a service, but especially for products, you need to figure out, how do I make this real? You need something physical, and that's a prototype. And I would say, this is where I talked about, you'll hear this sometimes in product development called MVP, or minimum viable product. So you need, again, if you don't need product 3.0, you need product 1.0. Then you can do a 2.0, they can do a 3.0, but you need to say, hey, what's like the minimum things that customers are telling me that they need to solve the problem right now? Build that into the product. Don't include everything in there, because when you do your market research, you'll get a lot of information, but you're going to start seeing core kind of themes or core things that get repeated over and over and over. That's your minimum viable product. Then you'll have some people that are like, well, it'd be really nice if it did this or this. You'll have kind of these outliers, and they're not outliers, but they're more like on the periphery. Those are your 2.0 products. You know, that's your next iteration, but you're going to see or hear kind of a core set of features and benefits that you need this product. So that's what you need to build with that minimum viable product. Again, the idea is, what do you need to solve customers' problems now to kind of get them started? They don't have to solve everything in the world for them, but you need to solve kind of like, it's the 80-20 rule. You know, you need to solve like 80% of that problem with that minimum viable product, but you don't need to solve 100%. Then narrowing that scope is also going to help you with development. It's going to help you with costs. It's going to help you not over-engineer something. And once you launch a product, the customers using it that buy it will give you should always, again, market research. You're talking to them about, why did you buy it? How are you liking it? What's going, you should be conducting market research with them. But then they're going to tell you like, oh, this thing is really good, but I really wish it did this one other thing. And they're going to tell you what your next iteration, the 2.0, should be, because they're going to see, this solves like really most of my problems, but it'd be really nice if it did this extra thing. That's going to be your improvement, your new and improved version. So again, they're going to give you feedback on what you need it to do for your next iterations. The thing with prototyping, if there's a way, prototyping can be ugly. It can be the most janky mock-up thing. It can be, I've seen people use PVC pipe and duct tape. I've seen people like use, like if they have any electronic components, they lose those little Arduino, like there's something like they use like in kids' toys, and kids make like little robots with. I mean, they'll use all kinds of things. They'll cobble up and use, like little wheels that are like from like toy shops. Like they'll do whatever they need to kind of figure out if you can make something with off the shelf parts. And like I said, it's ugly. It's duct tape things. I'm gluing stuff together. It needs to just kind of like be representational. So you need to kind of start figuring out form and function. Is this too big? Does it need to do something else? Do I need to make it longer? Do I need to, you can draw it out on paper, but until you kind of physically see it, it's really hard. It makes things, you find things that you're like, oh, this is really too short, or this is so fat that, it's so bulky that somebody can't hold it in their hand, or, you'll start figuring out, even though on paper it looked okay, it may not be quite. So you need to make this kind of prototype. The first ones are going to be just ugly. It can be, if you can, it'd be, if you have any kind of skills, and they have a lot of kind of easy software program, let's say easy, less complicated, like kids are doing 3D modeling. So there's software out there that it's good for, a kid to use. You don't have to have AutoCAD and be like a 3D model at this point yet, but you can build something simple in, I'm trying to think of the program. I can't think of the name right now, but there's all different ones out there aimed at like kids to kind of start 3D modeling. And then you can take that model, build something up, and then get it printed at like a 3D printer. So there's 3D, you don't have to have your own 3D printer. There's commercial services that will 3D print for you, like Shapeways is one. And it can make it out of plastic, even if that's not your final material, might need to be metal, but you can make your prototypes out of plastic, so start thinking how you can, or maybe you can work with somebody in your family that's got some CAD skills or engineering or likes 3D models. Maybe there's like a local group that can help you. Like I know the library will offer like 3D model classes, like using that kind of easy program. So maybe go take some classes there, or workshops, or classes online to kind of figure out how to develop it. Because the idea with the prototype is you need to kind of be down and dirty. It needs to be cheap. I don't want you to spend a lot of money yet, because you're going to prototype. You're going to find the first ones. Wow, this is not really working. This is too big. And then they're going to fix it. So if you have engineering skills, that's fantastic. You'll speed this process up. If not, there's ways to get around it. But the idea is like, you need to kind of think fast and quick, because you're going to iterate. You may stay in this little kind of prototyping for a while until you kind of feel like you might have it right. And then you're going to take it out to the market, and you're going to do market research again. You're going to take that ugly prototype. You're going to go out to those target customers. So the people that you talked to earlier, keep their contact info and follow back up with them saying, hey, I have like just like a really rough prototype. Would you mind just like looking at it, even if it's not doesn't function, like maybe just for fit, like size, and maybe it doesn't even have all the functional capabilities on the inside. Maybe it's just more for form and function, or form and fit. Again, go back out to those. Again, this is also your target. You're keeping them warm. So at some point, when you have a product, you can market to them. But right now, you're saying, hey, I would love to get, because you're knowledgeable about this. This is a problem that you have. It would really help me if you could just kind of look at this. I have a really, and if you tell them it's a really, really rough prototype, then they understand that. They understand. They're not going to ding you on like, wow, this is kind of janky. It's duct tape and PVC pipe. They'll, as long as they say, hey, I just want to figure out, like, is this even the right size for this thing? Is this something else need to be bulked up? Is this too big? Is it too heavy? Whatever. Then if you tell them that, they are very forgiving. They understand. But if they think they're going in and looking at a finished product and you give them a PVC pipe and duct tape, then they're going to go, wait a minute. But if you tell them, hey, it's a super rough prototype, it's really early, I'm just trying to figure out, is this even the right size? Something basic, and then have them look at it and give you feedback. That'll be huge to kind of capture where you might be missing it. And again, you should kind of do a couple of iterations probably of yourself, going through like, oh, this is not working, or I know it based on what I did the market research the first time, this is not going to work, or I needed to do X and it's not quite there. So when you get to one where you're like, okay, this might be something still going to be ugly, but it might be a little bit more something I could show somebody. And then speed is essential. Like these need to be down and dirty. At some point, you're gonna have a more refined prototype. When you kind of feel like you're dialed it in and you aren't really getting any new feedback from customers, like they're kind of going, or they're telling you like the same things, like, okay, yeah, then you know at that point you can go to more, you can get engineering involved, you can actually have a more functional prototype created that's going to actually be the right size, be the right shape, be the right finish, right material. And then that prototype you can take out to consumers and say, hey, here's kind of before I go to production, here, is there any like last minute things that I'm missing in that final prototype? The other thing too is when you're talking to customers, again, you should always kind of be asking subtly the price question in the sense that, you know, you haven't gotten your costs are still under, you know, you haven't finalized your costs yet, but you need to start, again, you take that prototype out and you talk to them about it and they kind of use it, even if it's ugly and even if it's kind of janky, they'll still give you some, say, okay, so is there, you know, what do you think this might cost? What do you think you would pay for this? Is there a range? Even if they don't know it's $50, they may say, oh, it's probably like 50 to 75, you know, or whatever it is. Start getting and tracking that, what they think, again, because you're still explaining the value proposition. When you take it out to them, you're talking about the value that's going to bring and what the product can do. And again, always in terms of the voice of the customer, what they want. And then they're going to say, oh, well, then you can have something physical to kind of show them. And then again, it's another chance for you to ask, like, what do you think this is worth? What do you think you should, you know, what do you think you would value? What do you think you would pay for this? Don't go out there and say, would you pay $50 for this? You know, you need them to tell you, not you kind of pushing a number onto them, because you really don't know. You're trying to get feedback from them on what that market pricing structure looks like, or what that kind of the value, perceived value that that customer has for that product. All right, it is a break. So right at an hour. Do you want to take like 5 minutes? Let me see. I don't think there's any, or if you have any questions, I'm going to sit here so you can ask me, or pop them in the chat, or we can just take a quick 5-minute break for everyone. And Michelle, are you still on here?
I think I'm going to sign off now.
Okay, I was gonna say, I was like, wait a minute.
Very good.
All right, and I know Missy and Connor, you're driving, so I don't expect you to have any questions at this time, but I don't know if Cindy or Kimberly, any questions at this point? It's a lot of information, I understand that. Or if you want to share your product ideas. The other thing too is don't be scared to talk to people about your product ideas. No one's going to steal it. Ideas are, you know, no offense, are a dime a dozen. Everyone has it. I don't know how many people I've talked to that we're talking about product development and they go, yeah, I had the idea for, I don't know, something, name anything, way before that person launched it in the market. And I'm like, you always hear somebody saying that they had the idea for Shapeways, or they had the idea for, I don't know, any electronic gizmo. I had the idea for that app before somebody else did. That's great. Ideas are a dime a dozen. It's the execution of that idea is what's valuable, not that I had the idea. But it's hard work. It's a lot of hard work to get a product to, and that's why so many people have ideas, but if they can't do that, if they're not willing to do the hard work to get that product launched out in the market, then they can have all the ideas they want. It's the execution of those ideas. All right. So if there aren't any questions, then maybe come back. It's 10:07. So like I would say 10:10, but that's not really 5 minutes. So like 12 after, if you want to take a break. But I'll be here if you have questions. Oh, no questions, Kimberly. All right. All right, I'll just see you back in a few minutes. Okay, it's about 12 after. I don't know if people can kind of let me know if they're back, either pop it in the chat or come off mute, except for I understand Missy and Connor that you're driving, so don't do anything unsafe. I want to make sure that Cindy and Kimberly are back. Oh, thank you, Cindy. And just waiting on Kimberly if you're back. You either come off mute or just pop it in the chat. For another minute, maybe. Just checking in with you, Kimberly, if you're back, if you can just pop it in the chat to let me know. All right, one more time, Kimberly, if you're back, you pop it in the chat. That's the downside of not having video on. It's like, I can't see you to know if you're back or not. All right, well, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Again, if you're not back, get Kimberly, hopefully you can watch us later on video and just kind of join in because we kind of have a lot of information to cover. We're gonna move on to the next section, which is costs. And I will tell you, this is going to be one that's going to be super challenging because you're going to need to figure out what those costs are. Again, in my pricing workshop, I talk a lot about costs and how and dig deeper into costs. But we're going to kind of cover some of the things that you need to think about, especially when you have a physical product. It's a little easier sometimes to figure out costs, but sometimes there's things that you don't realize you got to build into that product cost. Because again, that product cost is going to drive, and then your profit margin on top of that is going to kind of drive that price point in the market. So it's really, and in the beginning, because you're going to have small volumes, you're going to be, you know, kind of a small, more than likely, you're not going to have the volume to get really good costs. You're going to have a little higher cost structure. And then you got to think about, do I see a path of like taking costs out of this product? Or there are what ways you can bring those costs down. So first thing about costs is there's direct costs and then indirect costs. Again, for products, it's easier. Direct costs are, it's the raw materials that's used to make the finished product. So when you get a quote from, we'll talk about the two different routes, one being manufacturing it and developing it or doing the production process yourself or contracting that out versus maybe a licensing option. But if you're going to go through actually manufacturing the product, then you will get, more than likely, you're not going to, if you get it done in a facility, you're going to have to build out, like you're going to get a quote from a manufacturer, a contract manufacturer to give you a cost structure and to give you what that product costs are. So those are going to be direct costs. It's the raw materials, components, things that go into making the product, you know, making every single widget down the line has an X amount of cost of materials and components. Then there's going to be indirect costs. So those are things that may not be tied directly to the product, but they're going to be tied to your business. So it's going to be things like, you know, it's your marketing expense or sales or it's promotions. Those are indirect costs. They're not tied one-to-one to every widget down the line, but they are things that you need to build into that product cost because you are still spending money. It's just kind of spread out over all the widgets instead of just directly one-to-one with each widget. Then there are also going to be variable costs and fixed costs. So for products, the more widgets you make, the more costs you will have essentially. So it's going to vary. So if I produce 10 widgets, each one costs per piece cost, but your total cost is going to be to the bill when you make that order for 10 widgets is one cost. And then if I order 1,000 widgets, I might have a different volume break and I might have a different cost per piece, but then my total cost my order cost is going to be much higher, even though maybe my per piece cost will go down for volume discount, but I'm still spending more because I still got to come up with that order, because all contract manufacturers are going to want to be paid in full before you get the product. So you're going to have some cash flow in there to place those orders, pay the manufacturer, bring the product in, and then we'll talk about that as well in that development launch phase. But you're gonna have to pay them pay that order, that invoice, before you actually sell the product. So you have to think about that lead time, and we'll talk about that. So those costs could vary. If you order 10, that invoice cost isn't going to be as much. Maybe if you order 1,000, it's going to be a much higher check that you have to write. Theoretic check. It's going to be a bank transfer. But the other things with costs is you have to make sure that, again, if you're contract manufacturer, if you were to build this yourself, then you have to start thinking about, if you're going to produce this, like say you have a machine shop and you can actually make this product in-house, initially, if it's small volumes, then you have to kind of think about, you get to build your own cost structure up. And that's going to be like the materials, it's labor to build the actual product. There's overhead things in there, rent, taxes, insurance, depreciation, all that stuff. If you contract out to a contract manufacturer, then you're going to give them an engineering drawing with specs and materials, and it's going to have all the information on there. Then they'll quote you a cost per piece. And usually you'll get a quote for different volumes. And sometimes volume breaks. If you order 100 or 200, you're not going to get much of a volume break. But if you order 100 or 1,000, you might get a different piece price or per cost piece price. Yeah. You might get a little discount by ordering a much higher volume, because they can order their raw materials in a bigger bulk. They can order so they can get a better price on raw materials to make it, because they're ordering more versus ordering a small batch. So again, that's going to kind of be, when you contract it out, you don't have to worry about some of these, but if you're going to kind of build it yourself internally, like make your small batches, like like small volumes, then you have to kind of figure out the full cost of that, building that product even yourself. Then there's also other things. So on top, even if you get a contract manufacturing, again, we'll talk about this a little bit more in fully into the development cycle, but it's good to understand how costs work when you go into that quoting or that development, because that between that prototyping and development is when you're going to start getting your cost structure. You're going to start getting ideas of, because you kind of finalize prototyping. At the end of prototyping, you've kind of finalized what that product is. You've kind of finalized the specs. You've finalized the feature set. You've figured out like what material needs to be, all that kind of stuff. And then you're going to move into that development phase, and you'll start getting your target costs. The other thing with costs, like if you get it quoted, you're going to have shipping on top of that. Packaging is going to be on top of that. So you have to understand they're going to have packaging costs on top of the product costs. So is it packed in a certain thickness of carton is going to be, what's the durability? Is it packed? And then they call them overpacks and master packs, where you can pack, there's one item in a carton, then you may be able to pack 12 cartons in an overpack, and then you may be able to pack those overpacks into a master pack and put four sets of 12 in a master pack. So they're going to build up things to make them most efficient in shipping, depending on the volumes that you're ordering. So just understand that packaging, shipping, delivery. So when they talk about a quote, you have to be very careful if they're quoting they'll quote it FOB. FOB is freight on board. So they're going to say, is it FOB? And say it's coming from China, which more than likely, most of your contract manufacturing is going to be in China. So it could be FOB China at the port in Shanghai, or is it FOB at the US port? Or is it FOB to your actual warehouse or location? So the quote will be different. So if it's FOB China, that literally means it's the price of the product and any transportation to get it to that port in China. That's FOB, freight on board to Shanghai. FOB Los Angeles, or to that will be, okay, they're gonna arrange for freight. They're gonna use a freight forwarder. They're gonna get it on a shipping container. And so your cost will now be the cost per unit plus the shipping all the way to the port in Los Angeles. That's FOB, like LA or Los Angeles. But then you have to arrange transportation from the port in Los Angeles. Again, you work with freight forwarders, shipping companies from Los Angeles to your actual location. So to your warehouse, to your garage, to wherever. So that FOB and most likely they're going to do FOB Los Angeles, the port, or East Coast, West Coast, whichever they're bringing it in. Again, the freight forwarders handle all that and they use the most efficient port in the US and the most efficient port out of China, wherever the contract manufacturer is. But then you've got to arrange the shipping. Then you have to know, okay, there's a shipping cost, additional shipping costs from the port in Los Angeles, whether it's by truck or rail, to my actual warehouse or to the final destination. So just understand that shipping logistics, when you get a quote, make sure you understand what's the FOB. Is it FOB China, Shanghai? Is it FOB, like they're going to arrange all the shipping? So if they go to the port in China, that means you have to work with the freight forwarder to take it from that port in China, put it on a shipping container, get it to LA, and then bring it to your West Coast, and then bring it to your warehouse. So those are extra shipping costs you'll have to absorb and pay. Or if they're getting it to the West Coast, they're going to put that in the quote to you, and they're arranging for the shipping, but you're paying for it, but it's just part of the product cost, part of that quote. So that's kind of key thing is about shipping. And then you'll also have to think about other things, other costs that you need to build in on top of the product costs is like, if you do any training or conferences or trade shows or marketing materials, you print anything, it's your, merchandising, it's POP, all those other kind of things like marketing costs, sales costs. So you'll have a product cost, you'll have shipping costs, and then you'll have kind of these other costs that have to sit on top. So all that needs to be built into your final cost structure. Sometimes we think just the product cost and we forget about all these other things that have to sit on top of it. So just be aware. And even if you don't know yet your marketing cost, actual cost are going to be, put some percentage in, put 5% in, put 10%, or whatever it is that you think you need to get that product out into the market and launch. And again, track that. So once you do launch it, you'll need to track those costs and say, hey, I'm really missing, I need to increase those, or that was higher than I expected, or it's not as high as I expected. But you have to make sure that your price to the consumer, that your product costs, all your other costs that sit on top of it, then your profit is to then the price point matches what all that research you did in the beginning, again, market research coming back, all that research you did to know what consumers are going to spend, what they're willing to pay. You need to make sure that your cost structure and your profit add up to in that line or in line with that, what the customer is willing to pay or what the competitor prices are out there in the market. And that's where, because you're going to struggle a little bit because you're going to have low volumes. You're not going to have established things, might be a little more expensive for you in the beginning. So your profit may be less. But then you got to figure out, do I see ways if I increase volumes, once I kind of get some traction, my cost structure should go down a little bit, my profit should increase, so you can if you can see how you can, even if you're a little, your profit's a little lower than expected initially, if you can see a way to you understand why your costs are higher, and then you have a plan for kind of reducing those costs, then you can do it for a little while, as long as you know there's a way that you're going to address that down the road. and here we are about revenue and profit margin. So every product you need to have a profit margin. Again, you have to build in the real product costs, all your other costs on top of it, and then profit. And when I go into the pricing workshop, we talk a lot more about this, but it depends what how you're selling the product, your distribution channel. Will also factor into that profit margin. Are you selling direct to consumer? Are you selling through another business? Like, are you selling to a business who's then selling to to consume, or selling to a business? Or are you selling to a retailer who's selling to a consumer? Or are you selling to a wholesaler, to a retailer, to a consumer? So again, all those, how many steps between you and the consumer, you need to factor into that profit margin, because every step that you build in between you and the consumer is somebody else is going to take a piece of that profit. And you have to make sure that your profit margin is big enough to absorb those other people coming in, those different distribution channels. What I see a lot of times is you'll start out selling direct to consumer, and you price it that way, and you use a profit margin that seems good then, but when you take that same product through other distribution channels, all of a sudden that profit gets down to nothing, because these other channels. So if you factor in all your costs and you sell to consumer and you have a 25% profit, you think, this is great, I have a 25% profit. The problem is you've established a consumer price in the market. When you start, if you want to sell that now to a retailer, to a consumer, that retailer is going to take out a chunk of that 25% profit. Now it's going to shrink down, because they're going to want 25% sometimes, because they're doing marketing. They have the customer base. They have they have sales. They have different things that they're helping to push and sell your product. So they do deserve some of that profit, because you're not taking those costs on, you're shifting them to them, and they have that target customer that you don't have. They have that connection to them. So that's valuable. That's worth something. So if you haven't priced it thinking like down the road, other distribution channels, your profit can start shrinking down to where you're not making much money on each product. So you go into, again, I would say take the pricing workshop. We'll have it offered, I think in February will be the pricing one, but just know that you have to kind of structure thinking about how you go to market initially and how you think you might go to market down the road to build in the right pricing structure and the right profit. So I do have to talk a little bit about, target pricing. This is also in the pricing workshop, so I covered a little bit here. The most common thing that I see in product, and this is traditional, it's not just people starting out, but big companies still do this pricing model of cost plus pricing. So in the pricing workshop, we'll talk about several different models. For products, there's the cost plus, which is usually what I just told you, that you have your product costs, you build some price or some profit in here, and then you go to market with that price. And you think, okay, here's my cost, I add 50% profit. That's my price to the consumer. And that's the easiest, because it's a cost plus. It's cost plus a profit. There's my consumer price. The issue with that is that or the good part is that it's pretty straightforward, it's pretty effective, and it can be very consistent. If your costs are fairly stable, then you're not really having a lot of variability in that cost, then it may work and just keep kind of chugging along. The downside is that it doesn't take into account the market conditions. So especially during COVID, if we just did a cost plus and price of products and shipping was insane. And so if we didn't factor in and really track that and just kept cost plus and didn't look at what the market was really doing and adjusting our pricing because of that, because our costs were fluctuating so wildly, we'd have been, in a world of hurt very quickly. And it doesn't always take into the perceived customer value. And I always use the example of like an iPhone. So, or any smartphone, if you see the price of those things, there's granted may not be paying it, but again, you'll see prices of $600, $800. I can tell you that phone did not cost, close close to that in the actual product cost because they have the volumes and the strength. So if the phone costs $100 to make, and if I did a cost plus, I might go, okay, it's $100, add X profit on, I might have sold it for $200. Like, and you may thought that is great. Well, the consumer perceives the value of a smartphone so much that they're willing to spend the $800 on a phone and that brand and all the stuff around that phone. So I would be leaving money on the table if I didn't understand that while I can drive my costs down can be lower than what the perceived value for that product is so high that I would be leaving money on the table if I didn't understand that even if my costs are low, but that perceived value, that's why that market research comes in. What do people expect to pay? What's out there in the market today? What are the competition, to know that even if I can make it lower, that perceived value is so high for the customer, they're willing to pay higher than just a cost plus profit. And I wouldn't know that if I didn't understand the market conditions and the actual perceived value by the customer. The one I always like to do is what I call the market down pricing model. So that's where all the market research you did, talking to consumers, call the competition or competitive analysis and product comparisons, all that. You see you kind of establish what's the market or the retail consumer price out there. Then you take out your profit. You're saying, hey, I need to build in 50% profit or whatever the number is. And again, different products in different markets will have that profit margin can be really small, and that profit margin can be really much larger. So you have to understand the industry and the type of product that you're going in. And that you can find that out. There's like trade associations for industry associations that may have some, kind of some pricing or target industry averages for profit in that industry. You could Google it a little, again, always with some suspect, kind of check the sources about, some person out there that's a leader in that industry has probably talked about, the typical margins for this category or this market at least. So, again, you kind of get a feel for, something like the grocery stores margins are like, for the actual grocery stores, margins are really thin. They're a high volume kind of market or industry. So if you were selling to grocery stores, you need to understand that they have very thin margins and they're all about volume and turning stuff on the shelves as fast as possible. Other industries that are more high touch or luxury products might have a much bigger profit margin because that consumer is willing to pay more for personalization, or they're willing to pay more for, something that's more exclusive in a product or more luxury product. So the cost might be higher, but that perceived value might be much higher. And they're willing to pay a much higher profit. Or that industry is a higher profit margin. So again, start with what the market price is, what you found from your market research, factor in what the profit is for that, typically for that industry. And then that should get you your target cost. And then when you get your actual cost, you can compare it to that target and know, am I way out of whack or am I in line? And that's going to be a big factor, because if you build that, because reality is reality, the market price is the market price. So you're not going to be able to, unless you had something that was so, again, extraordinary, to be able to charge double, because then what the top competitor is out there in the market, it's going to be really hard to come out with something as a new entrant into a market to take out the top product in the market. You're gonna have to kind of build that traction and build up to that. So you can charge more, and because if you have a better product and you solve other problems, but there's also some reality of like, I can't charge so much more and be way out of whack with. It's kind of like in real estate, that the house, there's always, you don't want to be that one house on the street that's like way higher than everybody else's, because it seems really out of whack with what the rest of the market is in that neighborhood. And you're like, why is that house like twice as much as everybody else? I mean, unless it was like ginormous, like 3 times the size, there's have to be some, then you're gonna really struggle because everyone's gonna see that market for that neighborhood is kind of this price, and this is gonna become a really big outlier. It's gonna take a really kind of special, it's gonna be a small segment of buyers that's gonna want that really, really expensive home in a neighborhood that's more down at this price point. So just be thinking about that. Because that's all going to, and the market, so that target cost, and then when you get your actual cost, that's gonna help you figure out, wow, am I in line or not in line? Because again, you need to kind of nail down your costs with quotes you can get before you go to production, before you start ordering products and inventory. You need to make sure your costs are dialed in and your pricing is locked in to know that, hey, I really got a cost problem here. Are there ways that I can address my costs are out of whack with where they need to be? So again, getting that target cost will help you with that. Again, market down means that you're not leaving money on the table. It's, you understand what consumers are willing to pay. Again, they might be able to pay more than what's out there in the market because you're offering a better product, but you can't be really out of line with what the expectations are. Or if you are, you might have over-engineered it. You might need to take some features out to kind of bring it back more in line, even if you're going to be better than and a little bit higher, but closer to what the competitive landscape is. It also helps prevent scope creep. So I would tell my engineers all the time, I would talk to them. I'm like, hey, I've looked at the market, I've done the pricing analysis, I've done the competitive comparison, done the market research. Here's my profit, here's where my target costs need to be. And then they get a quote and they understand, wow, there's some extra things in here that we can maybe de-feature that customers don't value. Again, when I talked earlier about engineers will like to put in, or you as developing a product, you want to put everything in there, which is great, but the consumer may not, again, it may put you so out of line with what's available that it's just too big of a gap. It's too far of a stretch to jump for a consumer. So then are there things that, or the consumer won't value those extra features you put in, not willing to pay for it. So, which is a big risk. So maybe you need to de-feature, take some features out to bring it back more in line, still being better, but back more in line with what the expectations are in the market and the price. Because the problem is that you can't, the pricing is, the competition is out there. So you have to be aware of that to know. And then if you are going to be higher, you have to be able to explain why you're higher, and it has to be meaningful. Again, voice of the customer has to be meaningful to the consumer of why they should pay more. And then every time an engineer or anybody, and this when you do market research, somebody said, wow, it'd be great if I had this in there. It's just like one person asking for it. You're like, okay, well, if I put that in there, what's the cost to add that feature in? Because every cost you add in just magnifies that price to the consumer. Everything is going to just you don't absorb that cost. You have to pass it on. So then that's going to make the price point higher to the consumer. Will a consumer pay for it? So every time the engineering would want to add something to a product, I would say, that's great. Let me go out and talk to consumers and see if they're willing to pay for it. And if they are, how much they're willing to pay for it. Because a $10 cost adder here might end up being a $30 price adder out here. And is that $10 in value worth $30 to the consumer or whatever that is? So you have to build that out and go out and test that before you add that in. And then you can say, hey, they're not willing to pay for it, or they're willing to pay $10 more for it. So you've got to get that cost down, that feature down to $2 if you want to add it in, so that kind of stuff. So you have to be very, very strict on your costs and what that is, because everything you do, you're not absorbing this cost. You have to be able to build it into that price, and people have to be willing to pay, because you can have the greatest feature, but if they're not willing to pay for it, you don't need to put it in the product. Okay. And then the only downside of market pricing is that you still have to, you still may be higher priced, but you have to, again, understand that the consumers are willing to pay for that, higher price versus what's out there in the existing product, and be able to explain that and get that marketing message across about, because if they're just looking at price to price, then and they don't understand why yours is higher priced, They don't understand the value of that. If you're going to be at higher price, you've got to really be able to be very clear in your value proposition and like hammer it home that we're higher price because it does this valuable thing that you as a consumer appreciate and want that you're not getting with the current solution. And then I would say, don't add any features, anything, unless you know the customer is going to pay for it. Don't over engineer, or everything you add in, everything you add in cost, you have to make sure that the customers are going to value that product and that they're getting their money's worth. Because think about you as a consumer, when you go to buy something, like people are willing to spend money. They'll put money down for something if they really think they're going to get their money's worth, that it's really going to be valuable. It's not that people only want to buy the cheapest thing. It's like, if I'm buying a commodity item, like, I don't know, paper towels or something, maybe it is a price point and be very difficult to enter that market because, you know, maybe there's not a lot of value or perceived differences between the store brand and Brawny or whatever it is, you know. So that's going to be where branding and marketing and other things come into it. But you're not going to have that price. You're not going to have that cost position of having huge volumes and being the market leader. Your costs are going to be higher, but you need to make sure that when you do that, again, that benefit you're giving for your product. You should never go into developing a commodity item. You will lose every single time because you don't have the cost structure. You don't have the volumes, but that's why your product needs to be, it's going to be aimed at a target market that's going to understand, hey, the current solution isn't fixing it. I am willing to pay, and they are willing to pay if it's going to give them something, a benefit, some value back. It's going to make life easier, better, you know, less hassle, whatever it is. I can see the value of how it's going to help me. So again, they're willing to pay for it, but they've got to see that value. If they don't see the value, doesn't matter what price you are, they're not going to pay. Just real quick about distribution channels. So if you do sell direct, I talked about direct to consumers, probably, I don't know your products, but most likely it's when people are starting out, are selling direct to consumer through a website or maybe on Amazon, or they're doing a direct to consumer, like locally, regionally. They may go to like local shows or different things where they can sell direct to consumers. So just looking at, this is where I talked about that profit and how it can start getting, you may think, oh, I got my costs, I sell to consumer, I'm making 25% profit. Everything seems great. So here's like, I'm just doing an example of, maybe I have your cost and your profit, and you're saying your cost is $50, you're gonna have 50% profit, and that's establishing your consumer price. And you think 50%, that sounds great, you know, that's a good margin, right? So the problem is then that works initially, and then as you get bigger or you get more traction, or maybe you explore other distribution channels, you need to think of, and you may want to say, hey, I might want to sell to a local retailer who has a shop, and then they're going to sell to the consumer. So I've put one more layer or one more step in between me as the manufacturer and then the consumer. So direct to consumer, there's me straight to them. Now I've got the retailer in between. So that means he's going to take a percent of that profit. So retails, again, bigger retailers or more established, they're going to tell you exactly what profit they expect, and they're not going to argue it. You're not going to be able to change their mind. This is what they're going to take X amount. Independent, like small independent shops, it can vary all around. I've heard some high numbers where they want to take 50%. I've heard 25%. In general, so whenever you go to this channel, you need to ask like what their profit, what they expect to take, you know, out of the profit, like what they, you know, their percentage, and they'll tell you. General is 20 to 25%, 50% seems a little high. They have to be doing I think a lot of kind of marketing or have a really strong customer base or something that would think why they need that high of a profit cut. They'd have to take on a lot of costs themselves and do some really active marketing and sales for you to get that high of a cut. But anyway, 25% sounds normal. So now that $50, that 50% profit now just got split between two. The retailer's going to take 25, just for round numbers, and you're gonna get 25. And that's okay, because the retailer should earn some of that profit, because they have a storefront, they have established customer client base. They're doing some marketing hopefully for you. They've got, placement on their shelves. They're doing some promotions maybe. So they are taking on some of those costs that you don't have to do. And they have that access to the consumer that you might not have access to. That's valuable. Their customer base is valuable, and their foot traffic or whatever it is going to be worth something. Or if it's online, same thing, that retailer's got the store presence, the online, they handle all the back end, they have the payment processing, all that kind of stuff set up, so they should earn some profit to cover their costs, and then they need to make money as well for doing it. Then you have another one. So now you have one layer in between, but what if you sell to a wholesaler? As you get larger and you want to affect more, if you want to sell to more retailers or like franchises or maybe small chains or regional distribution, now that same, because the problem is that you establish a consumer price up here, that direct to consumer. You can't just start increasing that consumer price just because you're adding in other people. That's not, the consumer's already in their mind saying, this is what this is worth. You can't just start doubling it to me because you've added in people in between you didn't think about. So if I sell to a wholesaler who sells to a retailer, who then sells to the consumer, now I've added an extra step in that distribution chain. And that wholesaler is going to want part of the profit. The retailer still wants his part of the profit. And then that 50% profit gets shrunk down, because a wholesaler is going to want 20 to 25%. Retailer is going to still want that 20 to 25%. So if retailer takes 20, wholesaler takes 20, now that 50%, you're down to 10. And that may be fine. That's why a wholesale price is always going to be different, what you price to them, than what they price to the retailer and to consumer. But that all those steps in that chain, the consumer pricing still needs to be the same. You can't, and retailers will be super angry if you are still selling direct to consumer at one price, and the price you sell to wholesaler, to a retailer, and then they have to sell to consumer to factor in their profit is now higher than what you're selling direct to consumer. That is a recipe for disaster. They will cut you off quick if you are not selling at the same price that they're selling at. So again, you have to factor in, you're going to have to sell a lower price to wholesaler, who's going to add their profit on, retailer's going to add their profit on. That consumer price still needs to be the same to the consumer, no matter which channel you go through. So that's something to think about when you're developing products. That's kind of unique, that again, you have to set it up right in the beginning. So you know, if you go to these other distribution channels, you've built in that profit, and you're not having to scramble or having to redesign your product to get a higher price point for it. All right, so now back to prototyping. So again, all these things, you need to have all these costs put in, or like finalized, and kind of nail down all your specs. Everything you're prototyping now is finalized, so you can get them, and then you can get the right quotes to build your pricing structure. So when you go at the end of prototyping, before you go into development or go into production, you're going to have engineering drawings, because you're going to have to provide engineering drawings to get a quote from a contract manufacturer. No one's going to just take a 3D, they'll actually want a 3D CAD model is good too. So, but you're going to have a 2D drawing. It's going to have to have all this spec information. It's going to have the materials. It's going to have thicknesses. It's going to have dimensions. It's going to have everything they need that a manufacturer can look at to quote, because that's how they're going to build to that spec. They're going to build to a print, to an engineering drawing. When you get this done, you can contract this out to, like, if you have an engineering skill set in your own, that's great, or somebody in your family is an engineer. Or you can actually hire, like, there's actually like industrial design or engineering services firms that will create the drawings for you. You give them, you still give them the specs, and they will also do an engineering, also has to look at tolerances. They'll look at, the materials used, are they durable enough, like for what you want it to be? So they do some other tests, they do some internal assessments that you need to have to know it's not going to break the first time somebody uses it. An engineer is going to point out like, hey, structurally, you need to have the curvature of this needs to be this, or this is going to have a hard edge, which is going to be a break point, or you need it to round. They're going to look at things to make sure that it's going to pass. And they're going to also understand if you have electronics, you know, is it going to be able to pass UL testing? Is it going to be, you know, if there's any kind of drop testing that has to be done, or any kind of safety testing, they're going to understand all that and do that for you as well. There's also a lot of engineering firms will also have industrial designers, because if your product has to fit like in somebody's hand, is it comfortable? Is it designed right? Is the outside fit and finish also going to be, because you don't want something that people like it's a grip or a handle or something, or it's something is too far or not. So they're going to look at kind of how that fits, and engineering and industrial design kind of go together, and they can look at that. So again, you have to have this to be able to go the next step to get quote into production. And also the engineering firms can usually give you kind of a target cost that they think it's going to cost to produce. So you can kind of start, this will give you a first indication before you go to quoting that, hey, my costs might be out of whack. And then you can work with that engineering or to kind of say, hey, are there things that we can do to kind of take some costs out before I go get it quoted? So an engineer can work up a kind of a cost structure for you as well. And they'll have a bill of materials, and they'll have things that you need to go to get it contract manufacturing. The other thing too is make sure that you get from engineering is a 3D model, because sometimes I will say, if you're going to have like small volumes, you may, and depending on the material, you may be able to take the 3D model and go to like one of these 3D commercial 3D printing companies like Shapeways or somebody else, and get 50 or 100, some small batch made first before you go to like actual contract manufacturing, because you're going to need much bigger volumes sometimes to go to actually go to a contract manufacturer. And maybe you can 3D print like the first small batches of these until you kind of gain some traction in the market. So that's one way we can look at prototyping that can go into development, a little more bootstrap economical than going straight into like production contract manufacturing. The one thing I would say is in engineering firms, anybody use, get references, make sure that they have done this type of work. People are happy with their work. I've had some people that had bad experiences with engineering firms that do this type of work, only because they weren't clear in the beginning, that they didn't have a contract. There wasn't clear deliverables. And so it was kind of like, it was a little too loose. And so they weren't happy with the results because they didn't have things kind of buttoned down in the beginning. So you want to have a contract with them. You want to have very clear deliverables. They're going to give you a 2D drawing. They're going to give you a target cost. They're going to work up a cost for you. They're going to give you a 3D model. They're going to give you, whatever it is, they're going to have those and how many revisions, because even when you work with them, once you get engineering involved and spec things out, you still want to do a prototype if you can build one, like, and get something 3D printed and then check it again, because the engineer's going to make changes. If the engineer's going to look at it from a manufacturing standpoint, they're going to say, well, this is good, but to manufacture this, we may need to tweak things. And so just to make it easier for somebody to produce and less costly. Usually if it's simpler, easier to produce, it's going to be less, it's going to help you with your costs. But you also want to make sure that it's not changing the fit, form, and function of the product. So you'll want to run another prototype to kind of, even if you make engineering changes. So, and there's going to be some revisions. You're going to go back and forth with the engineering and kind of say, well, this versus this, or he's going to have 3 or 4 suggestions, and you have to kind of pick one and then kind of see what that does to the product. Of course, standard. Use an engineering firm. They will not take your IP rights. You still own all that. Just making sure that if you have a contract that's stated in there that you as the inventor, a product developer, you still own all IP. No engineering firm is going to try to take your IP. But you just want to make sure that's in a contract. And then you want to make sure they have experience in that type of product, whether it's electrical, mechanical, industrial design, the materials, like you wouldn't want to go to an engineering firm that only does plastics and you know that this is gonna have to be made out of metal. And, just, they may still have experience, but they just don't deal with it all the time. So you kind of want to make sure that they have experience in the drawings or in the type of product that you're wanting to develop. And it doesn't have to be exact like medical products, but it's like they better understand plastics if your product is going to be primarily made out of plastics. So that kind of thing. Or if there needs to be an electrical component, that they have somebody on their team that's an electrical engineer that can look at that and understand, okay, from the electrical side, it needs to have these kind of specs in there for safety and testing. And then also make sure if you want a 2D or 3D model, 2D drawings or like a 3D model, that's part of the contract and deliverables, that they understand that that's factored in there. Again, the more clear you can be up front, then the less issues you have on the back end. So let's talk a little bit about IP protection. That's a big thing. I think a lot of times product inventors are concerned about, and I said earlier about don't be afraid of sharing your idea, even at the concept stage, talking to potential customers, and then they're not stealing your idea. Again, there's no way that a consumer is going to be able to, oh, you showed me this, because it's going to be like there's an idea and a concept. Again, they're not going to be able to execute it. And you're still going to have, there's many, as you talk about, this is a long process from the concept to developing the actual product and getting it to market. So again, you're going to have it's highly unlikely that somebody's going to steal your idea. I know that's a big fear. If you were really concerned about it, then you could have somebody sign a non-disclosure agreement or NDA, which means they can't share that you're about to show them maybe in the final prototype stages, or if you're down like kind of at the final design before going to quote and you're showing somebody, you could. It just depends on who you're showing. If I were pitching it to a company, a business to maybe license it, then I would definitely want an NDA in place. If I'm just showing like potential consumers that might be buying it, that's a different story. And you can always preface anything that this is confidential, but if you need to sign an NDA, you can get that from a lawyer. They're pretty standard contract for non-disclosure agreements. But again, don't be afraid to show people. You've got to talk to people about your idea, because you do not want to run down the path and get to production or even get this far. And then you show people and it's not at all what they want. And it's like you totally missed the mark, because man, you have to go back to the beginning and redo everything and all the time and effort and money you've spent and have to redo it. That's very painful. So again, showing people all the way along, and maybe it's a trusted group of target customers or something that you have more comfort with showing them things. Maybe that's it. But you've got to get real consumers out there using it, looking at it, and giving you feedback. So there's patents. There's 3 types of patents. For most of us, there's really just 2 of the types of patents that will be ones that we would have that would apply to our products. There's an agricultural patent. So if you were doing like designing new types of food or plants and things, and you were patenting plants, like that's a 3rd type of patents I've never worked on and never had. If you were in the, like I said, if you worked for a big agricultural company, you would be dealing with that patent. But for most of us, there's design and utility patents. So a design patent is more the industrial design. It's the look, it's the feel, it's the finish, kind of, it's how something is. It's the design on the outside, essentially. So it's more, if your product has a very unique feature and a handle, or it was like very much a fashion product, you might want a design patent, because you're protecting the look of something, the design of something. The other type of patent is a utility patent. It's more about how the function of the product. It's some unique characteristic that says, hey, the function or utility, how this works, is something that should be protected and patentable. So It depends on your product. Sometimes you can have both. You can have utility and design. I've had that on both, depending on what the product is. Sometimes just utility, sometimes just a design. I will say utility patents are usually stronger. I mean, a design patent is just about feature design and look. You know, they're not quite as strong as a utility patent, which is more about function, performance, something integral in how the product works. You do need a lawyer that's specifically trained in patent law to file a patent for you. And it can be expensive. So you have to think through about, do you need a patent or not? And then what the patent protects. And again, you have to go to a patent lawyer. You can't just get anybody to do this. You can't get a regular lawyer to do it because the patent lawyers have special training in how to file for patents. They understand how to write a patent as broad as possible to protect you, but they look at all the other potential patents out there in the market that might conflict with yours to make sure that it doesn't infringe on anybody else's patent. They do it. So they can review and assess whether you can even patent or not, because they don't want to just patent it if it's not going to, I mean, they'll give you advice like, hey, I've looked at the landscape and based on what's out there in the other patents, you can't patent this. This is not unique or doesn't meet, there's certain requirements to patent. You just can't patent anything. It has to be very unique. It has to be non-obvious. I mean, there's a whole list of criteria that patent lawyer will be able to say, hey, it does or doesn't meet these, what's out there in the landscape. If you did it, it would infringe. So it is money, but it's really worth it if you want to go down that patent. But as far as advising you whether or not to go down the patent route, it's worth that money. You can provide, they can file for a provisional patent. So, and then these are just kind of ballpark dollars. It kind of depends on the complexity of the product, the industry. I will say medical products, that's a way more regulated industry. It's a little more challenging. There's a lot more hoops to jump through. So that might be a little more costly to patent, because there's a lot of extra regulations around medical products or versus other types of products in other industries. So you can file for a provisional patent around $2,000. I mean, I'm not saying these are just general, time in the beginning. Again, it's just it's good only in the US. It's only good for 1 year. And then at that point, you need to file, if you want to go past the provisional, then you file for the full patent. You file in the US, and you also have to file, they have to look at, the patent attorney will talk to you about whether you want to file internationally or not. International patents, really more expensive than the US patents. It's significantly more expensive because you have to file for every country separately. There's the EU, but you can file for, but like after that, you kind of have to file for, and then even things within the EU, like Britain is now no longer part of the EU, so you have to file now separately for Great Britain. But the patent attorney will talk to you about whether you need to file for international patents. You should always file for the US patent, and then you have a limited time to file for international, and you have to know what that's like. It's like, I think it's a year that you have to then, if you're going to file internationally, after that, you lose all international rights. So you have to think, one, where are you going to sell the product? So if you were going to sell internationally and you knew you were going to sell in other countries, then you might want to file the patent in those countries, because if you're selling into that market, that prevents somebody else from developing a product and selling it in that same country. The other thing is manufacturing. So a lot of times we would file patent in the US, and then we'd file in the patent in the country where we were manufacturing. So if it was in China, Taiwan, India, you might file a patent in that country, because that would then prevent somebody from manufacturing that product in that country, and taking your idea and manufacturing it. Again, it's not 100% because there's no way to file for patent in every country in the world. So you have to and it's very, very expensive. And I mean, very expensive. Like it might be, and even the US is going to sound expensive when I throw out that a US patent might be $20,000 to file. An international patent, you could add another $100,000 on, like $120,000. So depending on how many countries and how difficult it is, and because the US attorneys have to contract with an international counsel in that country. To be able to, the US attorney has to get somebody in the EU to file for the EU patent. He can't do it here. So just understand that that's why you need to go to a patent attorney that can talk you through all these options and see what the best is in place for you. Now, if you are going to patent, you could file provisional, and then you'd want that in place before you go to contract to get manufacturing and get it quoted. Because once you start going into production, you would want that kind of patent, even the provisional patent in place before you run down the path of manufacturing, if you're going to do that step. Oh, and the other thing too is about the patents that you have to have the drawings done. Like that's part of the patent, is that you're disclosing how this is going to work, and you have to have drawings, and the patent examiner at the USPTO office has to be able to look at those drawings and understand, yes, I could build this. Somebody could build this thing. This is a real design. This is not just something made up. You know, the drawings make sense. Like that's why the patent examiners also have specialized knowledge in the types of patents that they issue, to know, hey, that this actually is a real product, not something that's just made up. And then your patent is good for, I think it's 25 years. So it's a limited, you don't get it forever, you know, but then as you make improvements to the product, then you could get another patent, like if you add on down the road, or you got at least 25 years of patent protection on that product. Oh, so the USPTO office has really great resources. They have a lot of webinars and workshops on the patent process, understanding how it works. It's a really great resource just to kind of get an understanding of what this, you still need a patent lawyer to file, but it can give you the more knowledge that you have going in before you meet with the patent attorney will just make things so much quicker. And of course, less time he spends on it or she spends on it, then the less time, hopefully that would help with the cost of that. But again, just knowing all the things you have to do up front. So I would recommend, if you're interested in patents, to go to the USPTO's office and kind of dive through their educational webinars and workshops. All right, break number 2, if you want to take it. We can do another 5 minutes, or we can push through. I'm just going to sit here either, or if you have questions, now's the time. I know, Missy, you're still driving. Are you guys okay? Take a break, or do you want to continue on? You can either just put in the chat or come off mute. It's up to you. It's 11:10. We could take 5 minutes and then come back. Or we can keep going. I'm totally up to whatever you guys want to do. But we probably have close to another hour, maybe not quite. We can keep going, Kimberly says. So, and Cindy's good with it too. And I'm Missy, I figure you're in the car, so you're good with that as well. Okay, we can keep going. All right. Again, I know this is a lot of information. And like I said, you'll get these slides, and the slides have a lot of text on them, only because I know you get them later. And so it's always good. So you don't have to write everything down, because you can reference back to the slide when I was like, well, she said something about X. What does that mean? And then go back to that part of the slide, or go back to that part of the recording later. So now we're going to move on to development, which is actually like our production. It's actually like building the thing, building the product. And you think, well, it's a lot of work to get here. It is a lot of work to get here. And I'm again, the more time you take up front, the less time and cost it'll be on the back end, I promise. So we talked a little bit about this already. So when you go into development, there's 2 kind of options that you have. You can go into manufacturing, where you either make it yourself, or you contract that manufacturing out. None of you are going to have your own plant to build things yet. So that's the third option, is you actually have your own facility, but probably not to that point yet. The other option is licensing. So if you have a product concept, you've done all the work, you've gotten the patent, provision, at least a provisional patent file, you could actually maybe license that technology, license that idea out to a larger manufacturer that could then build it, and then they would pay you a royalty. So that's the two paths we want to talk about. Both are equally viable, both have benefits, and both have pros and cons to them. And there's just two kind of paths you could take with the product. So we're going to talk first about manufacturing, which we've kind of talked a little bit about already. So you can most manufacturing plants are high volume facilities. They want to make, ideally, they'd love to make 5,000 widgets, same thing down the line, running just 5,000, just want to make the same thing over and over and over. So they're usually set up, some of them will have like smaller cells or smaller lines that can do lower volumes, but it costs a plant to switch over to a different type of product running it down the line is costly for a plant to switch over. There's a lot of switching costs involved. So they would rather run one thing down for a bunch of them versus switching out. And some plants are a little more flexible. They're set up to have smaller runs, but even the small runs, they want to have a minimum quantity that they want to have run down the line to make it worth their while to switch it out to another, before switching out to another product. The other one is low volume or small batch production, and we kind of touched on that a little bit, but we're going to talk about the high volume first, and then we're going to kind of touch a little bit on, like, if you have a smaller, which when you're starting out might be, what you do is see if you can figure out a way to have a small batch production. So high volume, that's going to be your, I call contract manufacturing. So it's going to be a manufacturer that makes this type of product in general. It won't be this specific product, but it might be like, maybe it's a new kind of toy, and they make toys, plastic toys. So this manufacturer is used to doing molds and the injection molding or whatever it is to make the toys. And even though they're not making this one, they make other ones that use that same process, and they can be the ones that would quote on this. And so they contract that out. You don't own them. You don't have a relationship with them. You're just like literally contracting like you would any other kind of contractor. You ask for a quote, and then they give you a price, and then you kind of go from there. So it's just like kind of a one-time contract for a specific number of pieces that they're going to make. It could be local, it could be in the US, although a lot of manufacturing has moved overseas. It's most likely going to be an overseas company, or international. It could be, there's China, there's also India, there's other countries that are stepping up their manufacturing, even though we kind of tend to think of China, but I've had contract manufacturing in Taiwan, Japan, India, China, many other countries, depending on the product that you're wanting to launch. There's exchanges like Alibaba for international. So you can go into Alibaba and you can actually put out a request for a quote, and then you have the specs, you fill out the stuff, and then manufacturers will, it's like a two-way market. And so the manufacturers go on there, contract manufacturers, and they'll look for products that fit their processes, their production facility, their manufacturing. And then they'll kind of they'll quote, or they'll contact you about, hey, we could build, the product that you're looking for when you put it out there. So Alibaba's probably the most well-known one especially for Asia, especially in China, that if you want to get it made there, again, you want to make sure that you, will have to send drawings, you'll send additional product information, you'll go back and forth with that manufacturer. Most contract manufacturers have somebody that speaks English very well, that you communicate with, so that's not ever going to be a problem, because they know they usually deal with Western companies as far as making products for, contract manufacturing with Western or English speaking companies. So you're going back and forth with them on product information. They're gonna provide you a quote. So eventually they'll say, okay, they'll have all the specs, they'll have all the things you've figured out, like this is gonna work. And then they'll give you a quote on, again, that per cost unit. So they'll give you a per unit cost. Like it's gonna be $5 per one unit or per widget. And they're gonna tell you that's the cost, and depending how many you order, that's gonna be your total cost, but you're gonna pay, it's gonna give you a piece per cost price. The other thing is I talked already about the quote, if you have any molds or setup fees, so they're gonna also have in there, it's if they have to create a mold, like a lot of plastic parts that are injection molding, or if you have parts that have to be stamped, then they're gonna have a mold cost, because they have to create a mold that they can stamp the thing, your product into, or they have to create a mold that they inject plastic into to form your product. So you're gonna have to, the quote should also include any molds that they have to build, and any setup fee. So I talked about when a plant changes over, every time they run something else on the line, there's a setup fee because there's a cost for setting up the new molds in the line, for bringing in the new material, switching it out from what they were building before. There's that setup fee. So they in that quote should be mold fees or any setup fees, and you're gonna have to pay those up front again, because those are costs that manufacturers incurring. And so you need to pay them for them to build the mold, or for them to do that change out. So again, those are standard costs that you should have to pay. They're going to want MOQs, which is minimum order quantities. So you're going to have to give them either that's like volumes, whether you normally would ask them to quote like 3 different price point or 3 different volumes or MOQs. So it might be, and the manufacturer might have MOQs even on there. A lot of times they'll actually say our minimum order quantity is 250 pieces, or it's 1,000 pieces, or it's 100 pieces, whatever it is. They're going to say, so you have to order at least that minimum. Again, that is how they ensure that it makes it worth their time to switch over their lines to make your product. And they're going to say, I won't, it's not worth it for me to switch over unless you at least order X amount, a minimum order quantity. You can always order more, but you're going to have to, then that's going to help you go, okay, can I order? And it's not going to be 5 pieces. It's going to be, more than like 250 or 500 or 1,000, or whatever it is for that manufacturer. So you have to order at least that. Then I would also say, quote me the MOQ, and then quote me, I'm making up numbers, say the MOQ is 250 pieces. Then I would say, hey, please quote me 250, 500, and 750 or something. See if there's a price break or cost break for the additional volume. You don't have to buy at that volume, but you should at least know. So again, when I talked earlier about your cost structure, you're going to pay the most at the lowest, at the MOQ, at the minimum order quantity. That's going to be your highest cost structure, your highest cost. The more they make, that should help them with that cost. The cost should go down per piece. The more they make, the mold fees and the setup fees won't change, because that's gonna, whether they make 250 or 1,000, they're still having to incur those costs. But a higher volume through may make that per piece cost go down for higher volume. So even if you don't use it now, you can't order the higher volume, at least going forward that, hey, when I do get the volumes up, my cost should come down. So you can factor that into your cost projections, and then your profit margins, and kind of say, hey, when I do get more sales and more traction, then my costs should go down to this, and you can kind of project that out. You want a clear contract, of course, with any manufacturer. That shouldn't be a problem with them. And they'll probably have a contract. Just read through that contract that they send you to make sure, or have a lawyer look at it to make sure that everything in there is kosher, in the sense of like they're not giving away anything or something, you're not taking on extra costs that you shouldn't take on. So you want to have clear deliverables. You want to have timelines. So when they give you a quote and you pull the trigger and say yes, then they should have, okay, then my production lead time is X. The shipping lead time is X. Like you should have, are they going to pay? Is it FOB Shanghai? Is it FOB West Coast? Is it, what's the timeline? And they should give you shipping timelines, because when you order, they're going to give you a production timeline, and it's going to be, they're going to slot you into their production schedule from the time you say yes, and you create it, and they place an order. They're going to say production lead times are 3 months, 2 months, 30 days, 90 days, whatever it is. They're going to tell you, say, okay, time you tell us go, we order the raw materials, we get it into our production schedule. It's going to be, it can be, during COVID, it was even longer. Things were crazy, but you know, a 3-month timeline is not unusual for a production lead time. So in standard, COVID was crazy. But so don't think that's why you have to place orders and forecast out before you get the product in. There's a long lead time, especially from overseas. If it's a domestic or US manufacturer, your lead times probably won't be as long, but they're definitely gonna be longer, and you have to factor that in from overseas production. So it's 3-month lead time, and then you would at least, it's a month or 2 on the water to ship it over here and to get to your location. So of course, at times that shipping can get longer. During COVID, shipping was even longer. You know, it was in the 3-4 months, even 6 months sometimes for things. But typically it's a month to 2 months on the water, because they're gonna have to put it on a container. It's gonna come over by freight or like by shipping, freight, cargo ship, coming to the port, get offloaded, get on a truck or a rail, get to your location. So yes, so you have to order and plan and pay for things before, it may be literally 4 or 5 months before you actually get the product to sell it, to in-house to sell. So that's why we're going to talk about launch and marketing, that you need to start pre-selling things as soon as they're, you know, you order and as soon as they ship, because you need to have things ready to sell. Like you need to have sales ready to go when that product lands here in the US. So again, you want to have a contract, clear deliverables, timelines, costs, all the things, shipping, ports, all that stuff. You also need to have, again, talked about the molds, paying for them up front. You might, because you're going to be someone that's new to them and they don't know you as well, you don't have an established relationship with the contract manufacturer, they might want a deposit or full payment when that product ships. Most likely they're going to say, hey, you need to pay me a deposit for me to start working on this, because they want some money, because they're going to be buying raw materials and they don't want you to flake out on them and then they order the stuff and then you don't buy it. And then they'll want payment when the product ships. So they're going to want the rest of their money or full payment due. So you're going to have to pay for it before you get it in. So that's because they're going to say, hey, I've delivered it to the port. I need my money now. And then that shipping time is just extra time, but they're going to want them because they've made their product for you. Shipping is not they're responsible. The freight forwarder takes it at that point, and the freight forwarder is responsible for bringing it all the way, shipping it through to the end destination. And then they also will have packaging. So when you talk to the manufacturer, they're going to suggest different packaging options, because they'll know what's going to survive shipping it all the way to the US. They understand that if, depending on your product's weight, size, configuration, they're going to say, well, you need to pack it here. You need to have this kind of foam inserts. You need to have, you know, for making it. So you don't want to just, and they're going to have very good, the manufacturer could have very good, suggestions. And I would go with their suggestions. They know how to get things shipped safely and intact when you don't want anything broken when it comes to the US. You may have some breakage, but they're going to have suggestions for how much packaging goes on the inside, the carton thickness, the number of cartons in a master pack, overpack, all that. So they will provide, but you're going to have to pay for that packaging. So on top of the product cost, there will be packaging costs. Again, it may be pennies per product, but you know, because depending on the volumes, they can amortize that out, but lower volumes, higher your packaging is going to be, only because they can't spread that cost out across as many units. And then they'll pack it, and then they'll make sure that and you need to make sure that they understand it's shipping all the way to like say it's coming to your warehouse, or your warehouse is your garage, whatever it is, and then you're shipping it back out. Or it's going to a 3PL, which is like a warehouse that does packaging warehouse, that products come in and they do all the shipping and packaging and sending it out to the consumer. Or they have to understand that it's coming into the US, but then it's being shipped back out to the US through FedEx or UPS to a consumer drop ship location. So that package needs to be durable all the way in a container ship, which is protected into the US and then back out through FedEx or UPS. That it also has to survive it going out to the consumer, because you don't want it to be damaged. If it gets here, okay, and then it gets damaged to the consumer, you're on the hook for that. It's not going to be the manufacturer, it's going to be you. So you want to make sure they understand that it's also coming in and then being shipped out FedEx. And there's also some, either FedEx or UPS will have like weight restrictions, like it can't be over 50 pounds, and there's different things that the manufacturer needs to know, well, I can't, how I pack things, and how much weight to know how it's being shipped will be a factor. And then if you can give me references that, you know, like other people they worked with, or other companies they've made products for, and always check them out and call somebody if you can, you know, ask them, who else have you made products for? As long as they're not a competitor, then they, you know, they may be able to tell you, you know, or give names of other customers that you can talk to make sure that, you know, because you can't go to the factory, you can't see their facility, you're kind of taking them on faith. And then, and Alibaba and those exchanges have like reviews and different things that you can look at. But, you know, if there's a way you can talk to current customers and just to make sure, hey, were you satisfied? Were they responsive? Did the product ship okay? You know, what was working with them like? That kind of stuff if you can. The other thing with manufacturing is a small batch. So this is where, if there's a way for you to, like, if you're just going to make like 50 or 100, something kind of small, is there a way that you can do that yourself, or do it'll be higher cost, but you're not, the upfront cost, the total cost won't be as much. So if I build 50, I'll have a higher per unit cost, but my total amount is still only for 50 units, not for 250, which is an MOQ, you know, so it's that total out of cost spend might be a little bit less, even if the per unit cost is higher. So one thing is, if there's a way to do 3D printing your product, and you can 3D print metal stuff now, you can 3D print a lot of things that is amazing. And it's come a long, long way from the very beginning of like the little printer in somebody's DIY. There's commercial printers, like Shapeways is one, that have like a network of 3D printers across the country. You upload your 3D model into Shapeways, you identify all the materials and that kind of stuff that needs to be made out of. It goes out to their network. People then quote to bid on, okay, I can build this for you, you know, first like small batches, and they can order 50 at a time or 100 at a time to kind of gain some traction, get that out in the market. And then your per unit cost will be higher because you're only ordering 50 pieces or 100 pieces, but you're only paying the total cost for 50 or 100 pieces, not for 250. So it is, excuse me. Oh, sorry, I had sneezed. I couldn't hit mute. Sorry, I apologize. But that's a way that you can maybe do like small batch productions, or if you're, thank you. Thank you. I apologize for that. It's probably very annoying on the other end. But so if there's a way that you can take your small batch production to kind of help you get started, it's also, oh, and I forgot to mention, when you do contract manufacturing with a contract manufacturer, you should always get them to build you a prototype. So let me go back. So you should always get, oh, well, that's coming up. I have it later on the slide. So it's capital, it's upfront costs, will be higher unit costs. This also, a small batch might let you modify the design. So I know we talked about prototyping and getting it out in the market, but then once you actually start building out more production and you get that at hands of people, you might get some feedback of stuff that you didn't anticipate, even with all the research that you did in like the prototyping stage. Somebody might, you might get some additional feedback of like, oh, could you just tweak this one little thing? Well, then if you go back and you haven't ordered 1,000 of them, now you can't tweak. It's like, okay, and before I run the next batch, I can get the engineering guy to tweak that 3D model, smooth this curve out, do something minor before I run another batch, so that can help you with kind of tweaking the model or tweaking the product a little bit before you've run 1,000 of them. Again, it's a way to have a build up traction sales early on and getting some revenue in. Again, you need to have cash flow. You need to have money coming in of some kind to help keep funneling into the business to help keep it growing. And then the downside of this might be that you potentially might have to do some assembly yourself. So say you get if the product involves both material like plastic or metal, but also like an electronic component, you might have like a motor or something, you might have to actually do some assembly and put the motor in the product or install some lights or something, that because the 3D printing won't be able to print the motor and print the product. So you might have to do some assembly yourself, again, and ship those out yourself. So you would have the motor come, like you would order the motors from a supplier, then you would order the 3D printed part of the product, and then have to do the final assembly yourself and ship out to orders. Again, you can do that usually if it's small quantities, and then that helps you. Then when you start scaling that up, it starts bringing some revenue in to help funnel fuel the business, and then hopefully you can scale that up. So this is, I was saying earlier, whether it's the high volume contract manufacturing or even this low volume, like through a 3D printing company, then always get a sample, a production sample, so that every contract manufacturer should not have any issue with giving you a production sample. If you order from something like Shapeways or through their network, order 1 or 2 pieces in just to get in to see that what they're making is what you expect it to be. So you don't want to order 50 and they come in, you're like, oh crap, these are horrible. Like they're not up to the quality. Order just 1 to make it in. For contract manufacturing, it's going to be they call it a pilot build. It could be called an IP build. It could be called an FPA or first piece approval sample. Depending on the quantities, it could be like 10 or 15. They're going to run a little tiny little, but you need it to be production. It can't be them hand making it in some lab, lab over there. It's got to be a small little FPA sample, IP build, pilot build, whatever they call it. And you'll pay for that because they're gonna produce it. So, but it's them actually running something down the production line. You're gonna get that in-house before you make the order for all the quantities. You need to make sure that what they're building matches your quality and expectations, that the color is right, the finish is right, there's no sharp edges, like all kinds of things can happen in a manufacturing process. And you want to make sure that it's a production build, a pilot build, and you're seeing those samples come in, and you'll pay for that, but that's well worth the money to have them to run that. So, and every manufacturer runs because they want to make sure before they run 1,000 pieces that they've got everything set up right. So they'll run a small production run, and have them ship that to you, and you want to give them approval that everything looks good, everything is working right, everything is functioning, and the finish match your expectations and what the drawing said. And if there's any issues, you go back to them and say, hey, the drawings say this, you didn't build it. And so then they'll have to rerun it, because that's going to be on them if they have to modify something if they didn't build it according to the engineering drawings. It needs to, and then you'll need to compare. Usually I would actually see if your engineer that did your drawings for you can kind of do a check too. Say, hey, can you compare these to the drawings, the specs, to make sure everything is lining up, the measurements match, the material match, because it may be metal or it may be plastic, and you're like, it's plastic, but maybe it's not the right kind of plastic. Like that engineer can go, oh, I expect, because there's tens of different kinds of plastic, and they all have different performance characteristics or durability characteristics. And some are more brittle, some are more supple, some are thicker, whatever that is. They're going to check to make sure that the right material, even if it's plastic, is matches the drawings, and the thickness match, all that stuff. And again, it has to be an actual production sample. It can't be something that they mock up in their lab or their facility. It has to be an actual, a pilot build or a sample build.